I liked my life in Troy. I love Troy. I loved my friends in Troy, and I didn't feel like I wanted to leave.
Hello, and welcome back to Troy Story, a podcast for the Color City, where we explore the history and people of Troy, New York, one conversation at a time. I'm your host, John Salka. As a fan of comics and graphic novels, let me just say how excited I am about our next guest, Kate Glasheen. I feel like this is my Glasheen family bingo card finally being completed, and I'm so excited to welcome Kate Glasheen to the show.
Yo, it is. I'm super pumped to be here. Thank you again, John. And I think I mentioned that, like, if this is now your third Glasheen exposure, I'm sure there's some kind of support group in the mix for what's going on. Yeah, no, I'm pumped to be here. So thank you very much for having me.
So just a quick, give a quick overview for you. You were born and raised in Troy, New York, and lived there until your departure for Pratt Institute for BFA in Fine Art. Kate has been a creator, artist, and contributor for several critically acclaimed books, participated in exhibitions and collections across the globe, and worked on several of the biggest properties in entertainment. Very cool. Their artistic interests find communion in fine and sequential art under the notion that there's something hilarious about something that's not funny at all. Super important, especially today's day and age. Constellations, one of my favorite books of the last few years, is their author-artist debut. Kate lives, draws, and tattoos out of Philadelphia with their partner Sarah and under the stringent supervision of Tiger Boy the cat. Pretty exciting stuff.
Yeah, yes, especially that Tiger Boy part. He's like kind of a new addition, and he's a madman. He's breaking everything I own, but I love him.
So right from the start, obviously, we're going to get into the books that I know you so well from, but talk a little bit about some of the other these biggest properties, entertainment, in addition to Constellations and your books.
Yeah, that's I mean, that feels like a distant life. So before tattooing and comics became my main focus, I was a freelance illustrator and really was just taking any job that would come my way. But there was a few that were like I was super into during that run, and a few of those things were so like there's how there's like trading cards for like sports and Pokemon and all that. There's also trading cards for things like Star Wars, Indiana Jones,
Sure.
Terminator, stuff like that. So there was probably about a 10-year period where I was maybe like an average of a set a year doing these things called artist sketch cards, which were like the idea behind it is so cool. It's like, okay, you get the cards that come in each pack that are just like, the mass reproduced cards. And then every pack comes with like a rare card or something. And occasionally those rare cards would be what I'm referring to as the artist sketch cards, which was the company in charge of the trading card part of this that the properties would hire would mail out these boxes of branded but blank sketch cards, and artists would sign up to do X amount, and then you would put a one-of-one drawing on each of the cards. So then those cards would then be inserted into packs as rares. So like occasionally people would, for the rare card, would pull out an original piece of art for the property. So the idea behind it was super, super cool. But it was pretty grueling, and the pay scheme was kind of like, at least when I was involved, was pretty messed up. But it did get me into like, it was like bucket list stuff when I was a little kid. Kate would see me like drawing Terminators for pay and drawing Star Wars characters for pay, and just like that is kind of like my brush with like big properties.
Where did your interest in drawing begin? If you go all the way back to sort of, you'd mentioned your childhood, where did that start?
That was pretty much like immediate. Like I can't remember a time I wasn't at least attempting to draw. And I was kind of like, and I was in a pretty good, like, I guess a pretty good setup to kind of encourage that. Like my mother is an artist and was always like so happy to like help me make art, or like, just like really encouraging. And my dad was not artistic, but very supportive of like, he was really into me being good at this thing and really liking this thing. So I got that acute support there, and then for pre-K, I went to RPI Play Schools pre-K, and that was a really like I remember it being like a very creative kind of art-centric experience. So that was super cool. And then for grade school, I went to Sacred Heart in Albia. For high school, I went to Catholic High in Lansingburg. And both of those places were kind of in that situation where they had like shoestring budget for art, if that. But there was never a year in that entire stretch where I didn't have an art teacher who was like so awesome to work with and so enthusiastic and like really went above and beyond to make sure that I was like challenged in like making art and it was and like celebrated it. So I had that support, which like not a lot of people get. And definitely want to give a shout out to those teachers, Miss Zimmerman in grade school, Mr. David and Mr. Murphy in high school. They did what they could and more with like very limited resources. So that really set me up to keep at this thing or seriously pursue this thing that I loved. And then when it came time to figure out what I was going to do post high school, I knew I wanted to go to college. I was torn though between pursuing literature, like the writing side of me, and then visual arts, the visual art side of me, obviously. Um, and that was pretty, I was very torn, like 50-50 on that. Kind of the decision came down to the wire, but I ended up landing with Pratt Institute for Visual Arts, but there was an option starting that very first year to go to the Utica, New York campus as like a satellite school where they would offer. It was a much smaller environment, and it was your first 2 years, your foundation years, were spent there, and then you're automatically transferred to the Brooklyn campus, and that was like a rather hefty financial difference. And I also was like, at the time, like I didn't want to leave. Like I liked my life in Troy. I love Troy. I loved my friends in Troy, and I didn't feel like I wanted to leave. So it was kind of bittersweet. And then in addition to the cost, the Utica campus felt like kind of a more manageable jump than going right to Brooklyn. And it was actually kind of interesting because Utica is feels very similar to Troy for anyone who's ever been there. I got there and I was like, whoa, I know this place, sort
Yeah,
of.
that like post-industrial, upstate city kind of struggling with what their identity is after the evacuation or disappearance of industry from those communities.
Right, absolutely. Like that environment, that unique feel of a place that like was once was something grand and is now just surviving. So that and I had an awesome experience there. That was like a really top-notch education and really like I knew like this is the kind of thing you think you're pretty good and then you get to a place like this you're like, oh, I'm not good at all, and then you get through the program and you're better, and that's cool. And Brooklyn was a really awesome, unique learning experience. I think it was challenging in the sense that my conceptual and technical skills were definitely advanced, but I didn't really get any training for how to then go into the real world with this. So, post school was a real trial by fire with basically every part of making this my career. So, but yeah, so that's what led me to this as a career. And yeah, the short answer to your question is just that like I've never not been doing this.
Your style, and again, we're going to get into the books, but your style of sort of ink and watercolor is what immediately caught my eye. So when I go into a comic book store or I go into a bookstore or whatever, I'm looking for graphic novels and I pick something off the shelf and I leaf through it. Obviously the story is a big part of it, but the first thing that you see, kind of like the cover of a book, in this case, it's the interior, it's the art that immediately grabs you and say, oh, I would love to just look at this book. Even if the secondary story, sometimes it's not that great, the art can really carry it. And I was immediately drawn to that because it is, I don't know if I've seen too many other artists that draw like you do or use color like you do. And I'm certainly no expert, but how did you come to that style, like to refine your style to be that ink and watercolor?
So I have always, always, always like, but as long as I've been drawing, which, as per our last answer, is apparently forever. Um, I've always been like really focused on line work. Like it's what I'm most interested in. It's what I just get the most satisfaction out of understanding and using. And then, for better or for worse, that is like I have continued down that path. And like, I think I always ask myself if it's very linear and like I'm less like the sorry, let me jump around. So the watercolors, I find that that kind of ethereal, kind of ghost-like presence on a page, at least the way I paint, is a good companion to the way I draw, which, as we said, is very line heavy. And it's there and it creates these color fields. It has a bit of an organic kind of gestural nature to it in itself, and my line work is always kind of gestural to some extent, if not a big extent. And it didn't, when I've tried to work with other mediums as far as coloring my comic work, it tends to kind of overpower the line work. So I found this was kind of the best relationship I found so far for kind of making these two components meet. Um, I do feel like I feel like unsatisfied with my painting though, for sure. Like I know I have part of me leaning into the line work is that I've kind of not neglected because I put a lot of time into like color theory and painting technique too, but definitely like not nearly as much as line work. So it's like if I ever get money to burn and time to kill, like I want to go back to go take get some further education in that. But yeah, I think short answer again is just that I found that watercolor supports the line work without interfering with the line work. And I think also to comment on what you were saying about like, picking up a book and seeing kind of like this unique art and just knowing that you want to look at it no matter what the story is. Like I feel like when I was a little kid, a few comics that were my absolute favorites were there was this limited series Havoc and Wolverine Meltdowns, and it was by the artists were John J. Muth, if I'm saying that right, and Kent Williams, and it was a fully painted comic. It was the very first fully painted comic I saw. And then, a bunch of stuff by like Bill Sienkiewicz. Oh, I always screw that up. But yeah, just these like oddball kind of drawing styles that were very out of sync with like mainstream comics. And I just found them like so provocative and interesting. And those have always stuck with me. So that's definitely me painting my comics is a product of that kind of like taking over my brain when I was a little kid.
So your latest book from 2023 is Constellations, and it's set in Troy, New York, as we've discussed. How did you decide to create a story around your hometown or set in your hometown?
Well, there's a bunch of reasons behind that, I think. I think a big reason Constellations exists is because I hit a point in my life where I really had to evaluate why these issues had been there, were there, what they mean, and both with like substance abuse and gender identity. And that was like if you spend your whole life just trying to like bulldoze through it and like not focus on that, I was like doing what I could without really dealing with these things, surviving the way I could without, as long as I could without dealing with those things. And I think that when the time came to kind of just like, just as things like this happen, you're like, oh, okay, well, at this point, like absolutely nothing else can happen until I now deal with this thing I've been ignoring my whole life. And to make this book, it was kind of like a box I could put all these things in and give myself a little distance between them because it would have been too much. It was too much for me to try and like really tackle what I was trying to tackle in the way I was, like so intensely and all at once that the main character Claire gave me a like kind of like a person that I could put all that on and analyze from a distance and kind of give me a bit of a buffer to emotional buffer to like not feel that shit so intensely and have a more analytical take on it. So, but part of that is that growing up in Troy was it was a lot of things. Like it was hard and horrible, but it was like great and amazing. Like I my time growing up in Troy is absolutely sacred to me. Like the places, the landmarks, the people. Like I still have some of my people in my life from some of my best friends are still best friends from grade school. Like um it all was such all the good to combat the bad was such a lifesaver for me and like such a source of genuine like joy and escape that there's no way that I can write a story. Claire's not me. There is fiction in this book. But a lot of things either are verbatim from life or pieces of it are inspired by, and then, with the timeline all jumbled up to fit an actual narrative and story. But like there is no me without Troy, and that sounds a little melodramatic, probably, but like it's true. So Troy's as much a part of that kind of story that I was trying to tell for myself that any other character is. So it was kind of like a non. There was no other option for it. Never crossed my mind for it to take place anywhere else.
So the story is about addiction, gender identity, loss, recovery, a lot of other complex themes, and you sort of touched on it very briefly there. But what was your process for determining how much of your own story would be blended into the character of Claire and the larger narrative? And I know that's hard. I hate, as a songwriter, and a creative person, I hate when people ask me like, hey, what was your process behind like breaking down this really complicated, nuanced, deeply personal story? But I do, I'm personally very curious about it because I love the book so much. And how do you decide where that line is between you or how much of yourself you share in the story?
Yeah, that's a tough one because it's like I mean, probably sounds super weird, especially to anyone who knows me. But like, I'm very outgoing and I like love meeting new people. I love just like being in the mix and like pretty, I guess you could say gregarious if people actually describe people that way. But I also am super private about those things. And like, that's also a mix of like I grew up in an Irish Catholic family. So, mum's the word on anything that doesn't just like go with the grain. Um, and part of that is just like feeling really bad about these things and not wanting to address them. But part of it too is just like that's that shouldn't matter. So I don't like having to share that with people. But it's like it does matter. Like you can't exist as like a you can't exist outside of like the binary and it not be an issue your whole life. So I kind of like, as much as I wanted to keep that private, like I was never really allowed the option for it to be private. So I wanted to, I had to tell it like none of this was comfortable, but I had to force myself to pull all the things, all the experiences I had that I felt mattered to a truncated version of this, like the Cliff's Notes of my life. And then, as I kind of mentioned earlier, life doesn't always fit in like the narrative timeline. So, jumping around in my life and kind of curating things that mattered to the story I was trying to tell. And then, like, if I had to trim things back to fit into place with each other, like the puzzle pieces of the story, then I would do so. If I needed to fill in if I had to fabricate something to fill in some gaps, I could do that. And also, I wanted to like as the characters developed, as I was like working more and more on this, I wanted to stay true to their characters. They're inspired by real people, but I wanted to make sure like that the fictional version of them that came to be it was given like the proper reactions and scenarios that would do them justice. So I guess I started with like the really like shorthand equation for that would be like take the things that made me feel terrible, put them on a page, see how you can fit them together, and then whatever doesn't jam together can kind of like suss that out.
And I think for those who have read the book, or even perhaps those who haven't, there are those key moments you describe Claire, Claire experiencing these moments throughout their life where horrible things happen, and how it kind of has propelled them forward, traumatic, family oriented, abuse of alcohol, etc. And that comes through very strong. And I think the thing that stands out to me, or at least one of the bigger moments in the book, is Claire at therapy. Michael, is it Michael is the therapist? I'm trying to remember. Help me here if I'm totally stumbling on the terminology. But at this go ahead.
We'll say Michael, and then if I have to fact check myself, we'll just re-record over this.
Just going through Claire going to therapy and working through rehab, working through those experiences, and talking about why are people so mean, and the responses that everyone has toxic baggage that they bring with them, and that's sort of the thing that influences the way that they treat other people. And I found that to be something that jumped out very strong. It's everybody has their own shit. And sometimes they let that shit influence who they are towards other people rather than trying to work it out, which I think is kind of like the core message of your story.
Yeah, no, I think you're pretty on the money with that. I think when people are terrible to each other, that's coming from an example that was like set for them, either like done to them or shown to them. And yeah, my friend and I, Johnny and I, were talking recently, and it's like in addition to your experiences like outside of the home, in the home, it's like, what kind of malware are you just gonna be downloading by having the family you have, by living where you live, by experiencing what you experience? And it's we carry that with us, and I think it's really complicated because without a lot of work, we're just going to repeat that. And I think there's also a point where people get so damaged and had so little resources to address it that it will never cross their minds to address it. If they do something to someone and then that person does something to someone, and it's going to go on forever. So at some point, like, you can like try and minimize these damages that are kind of like radiating out.
That was part 1 of our interview with creator, artist, and writer Kate Glasheen. Stay tuned for part 2, coming soon. We appreciate the support and always love hearing from our listeners. Drop us a line at mail@troystorypod.com. That's mail@troystorypod.com, or head over to troystorypod.com to explore our archive of previous episodes. Until next time, love yourself, love one another, and may Pod save Troy. Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City, is hosted, written, edited, and produced by me, John Salka. Our theme music is by Stephen J. Goldman at Four Legs Records. Like what you heard? Please give us a rating and review on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City. This is incredibly helpful for getting others to find our show. Want to know more? Visit troystorypod.com to see upcoming episodes, guests, and bonus content. Thanks for listening. The views or opinions expressed by guests are their own and not of the host or Troy Story, a podcast for the Collar City. The views and opinions expressed by the host are their own and do not represent the views of their employer or any other entity.